Okay, Lou.
All right. Well, I'm very excited to have Matt Lisle as our speaker today. Matt is the Director of Digital Learning Technologies at the Center for 21st Century Universities, which is a research center at Georgia Tech that looks at impactful trends on higher education. Matt's had a lot of really good professional and academic experience in instructional design. He's worked at UT Austin and also holds a master's degree in instructional technology from the University of Georgia. Really strong professional focus on technology enhanced learning experiences. And I don't have the title of your talk in front of me, Matt. So oh, here we go. Digital Credentials Consortium is the title of the talk. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Lisle.
I was going to say, I also don't have a title for my talks. That makes two of us. So thank you all for having me. So as Lou said, I work in this department at Georgia Tech. It's sort of like a think tank for thinking about the future of higher education. Yeah, I'll make that bigger. Let's see if I can. Always after I share. Is that looking better?
Yeah, maybe press F11. It will be.
Oh yeah, I just don't want to. Oh, I know what I can do. I have my slide notes, but I'll throw those over there. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Is that looking good?
Great.
Okay.
That's great.
So I'm going to talk a little bit, or I'm going to start by talking a little bit about stuff we did before the Digital Credentials Consortium, kind of like how we got into this and why we got into this, early pilots we did. But then I'm going to spend the majority of time talking about this group. Digital Credentials Consortium is 12 universities, but I'll talk more about that in just a moment. The way that C21U, the department I work in, really started getting into this was, oh, okay, there we go. Well, Lou, you know better than me because Lou is a member of this commission. We started this commission on creating the next in education at Georgia Tech. This was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And Lou was a member. It was a group of about 40 faculty, staff, and students who spent about, I think, over a year doing research and discovery and thinking about what education is going to look like in the future. And one of the big themes of the report, so the output of that commission was a report. You can, if you Google it, you'll find it, the C&E report, Georgia Tech, but was this theme of lifelong learning. And the example we often use now as a result of that is this person, John Doe, and I'll use this example several times when I talk about Digital Credentials Consortium, but the John Doe basically is sort of a persona for what we see more and more these days. So used to be, you could go to college for 4 years, get a degree, get a job in that field, work in that same field for 30 years or whatever. And that was what higher education looked like. Now we're thinking more about all the way through a career and the role higher education plays. And so this person came to Georgia Tech in '95, got some credits at Emory, but ended up with a bachelor's degree, went back to grad school at San Jose State. This blue line kind of reflects their career trajectory. And so started seeing some changes in their career here, and they went back, did some MOOCs at edX and Coursera, did a coding boot camp. And you see this kind of thing more and more. It goes on and on all the way through the career. But the question we asked is, how does John represent all of this to someone? Does he have to call the registrar's office at Georgia Tech, pay him a little money, tell him to send his credentials somewhere, and then call the registrar's office at San Jose State and do the same thing there? What does he do about the coding boot camp in 10 years? Are they still in business? Are they still around? Can they still provide his credential from there or verify it for someone else who wants to? So we were asking questions along these lines. And by the way, I'll say we were asking these questions, but like Melody, I think you were probably asking these questions too. Like everybody was kind of in this same mindset. And then we were also asking, what does the job market do about all this? So when you're a hiring manager and somebody comes to you, how do you sort out these different credentials from these different places and compare and contrast? And how do you know that they're legit and that kind of thing? So when we started asking those questions, then we started deciding to start experimenting with digital credentials and doing some pilots and doing some research on this. And so one of the first things we did, was this was about 2017. We started experimenting with block certs. Block certs is, it came out at MIT Media Lab, and it's open standard for blockchain-based credentials. It started in 2016, they used the Bitcoin blockchain, and then they expanded to Ethereum in 2018, which is another blockchain. And I say coming soon here, this is a slide I've used many times. I honestly don't know if they've expanded beyond Ethereum since that time. We're doing less with block certs these days, but they were trying to expand to multiple blockchains. So we started doing pilots with block certs. We started just issuing any chance we got at Georgia Tech, primarily low stakes credentials. So here's an example of a seminar that happened at Georgia Tech. And so everyone who attended got a block cert. We were doing things with student organizations, conference presentations, professional development opportunities, some more low stakes credentials. The reason we did this, we got two things out of doing this. One was we worked out some of the technical hurdles. How do you issue block certs? How do you, we created a few different tools that we contributed to the block certs community. So there was like some technical hurdles that going through these pilots helped us figure things out. But more than that was we wanted to do sort of UX research and user research. I feel pretty strongly that when it comes to things like digital credentials, until you've been issued a digital credential and you've added it to a wallet and you've tried to share it with someone, it's a little hard to have like an in-depth conversation to get feedback and ideas on the topic. So by doing this, we issued, I want to say hundreds of block certs over a 2-year period at these different events. That gave us people to talk to and to start getting ideas and feedback and like direction from. So there was two things. It was the technical side and the user research side. I wanted to show you a few of the things we learned from the user research side in that process. So one thing is we started doing interviews with people and we got lots of feedback, some positive and some skeptical. The positive feedback, like this person, this is pretty typical, which is that they could see it being beneficial in the future, looking for jobs for employers, things like that. That's sort of the benefit I think that a lot of people's mind go to directly when you think about things like this. But this next person had, whoops, skipped it again. This person had a really interesting thought that I hadn't thought of before, which is you think about, you have this wallet of your credentials and over a period of 5, 10, 15 years, it's a really powerful way to go back and reflect on all the things you've learned. So I forgot all about that coding boot camp I did back in 2017. So you kind of have, it's almost like also playing the role of an e-portfolio that you can go back and reflect on your own learning. So I thought that was really nice. But some of the other stuff we got was skepticism, and it's stuff that I agree with. It's healthy skepticism. It's one thing that was very common was nobody knows what this stuff is. Like if you gave me a digital credential or a badge or a block cert or whatever, and I sent it to somebody, they wouldn't know what to make of it. So that was one thing we heard from a lot of people. Like I don't mind being issued these things. I'm not sure I would send it to anybody because at the moment they don't really know what it is. So we heard that kind of thing pretty often. This is a slightly longer one saying kind of the same thing, but basically there needs to be, until you get to a, what's the word, mass, I'm having a brain lapse, but until more adoption. There you go. It'd be hard for people to see these as useful. So that was valid feedback too.
Like critical mass to where everybody is accepting it. Yeah.
Critical mass was the thing I was trying to pull out of my brain. Yes.
Well done.
Exactly. The other thing we did at this time is usability tests. So we took 12 students at Georgia Tech over the course of a couple of months. And we gave them some tasks all the way from earning to claiming a credential and adding it to a wallet and sharing it with someone, and watch them along the way and then ask some questions. And we found some pretty interesting things. I won't go through all of this, but two things that I thought was really interesting is vocabulary. A lot of stuff that we take for granted when it comes to this stuff, we shouldn't take for granted. Things like wallet. I've already said wallet probably 5 times in this presentation, but when we talked to people, they were like, what do you mean wallet? This may be less true now. That this was, 2018, 2019. I think more people are using digital wallets now than at the time, but wallets. Another one was credentials though. Students were like, when they heard credentials, almost all of them thought username, password. They didn't think credentials like we were talking about it. So that was interesting, and it's something we have to think about. But then this other one was really interesting. It's just like the use case that we think of for how people use credentials is always like proving something, a knowledge or a skill or ability that I have to a third party. But there's also all sorts of other benefits or uses of credentials that we can't forget about. Like this student said, if you move all this stuff digital, I need it for my visa. Like, is that still gonna work for me? And those were two really good findings that were really interesting. And then lastly, we did some workshops. So this is a workshop we did we had, I think it was 40 people, and we had a group of students, a group of faculty, a group of local employers, a group of admissions officers, undergraduate and graduate, and then a group of like registrars type folks from Georgia Tech and the Atlanta area. And we just spent, a half a day talking about digital credentials. I would say the highlight of this, or the key insight from this, is one topic that all of these people talked about was the concept of letters of recommendation. Every one of these groups, the students, the faculty, the employers, admissions, they were all like, the process of letters of recommendation is broken. Students don't know who to ask or how to ask. Faculty don't know who the student is that asked. Often they have to go back and remember who the student is. Employers are like, it doesn't have what I want to know, and I don't know if I can trust. Like everybody had something to complain about when it came to letters. So this group actually, and I hadn't expected this, but the group spent a fair amount of time thinking about how digital credentials could like replace letters of recommendation. So anyway, that's just a snapshot of the interviews and surveys and workshops and kinds of things we did. So as a result of all that, we eventually connected with people that were forming this new group called the Digital Credentials Consortium. And they had just started at the time. They invited me to come out they were having an in-person meeting in Boston. MIT is one of the schools in the consortium, to come out and give a summary of like all the stuff we've been doing with block certs and with this research and stuff like that. And we ended up going to the meeting and joining the consortium. And the consortium, the mission here, you can see, create a trusted, distributed, and shared infrastructure for digital credentials. And I'll talk more about kind of how we're doing that and the different things that are happening. But at the bottom there, we released a white paper. And the white paper kind of talks about our vision, some of our goals, our guiding principles and things like that. And it also kind of gets into some of the technical weeds as well. I have that link at the last slide as well. So this won't be your last time if you want to see it. But so the Digital Credentials Consortium is 12 universities. And all of these people were kind of in the same place as us when we joined. So we had all been piloting, a lot of these universities had been piloting block certs, but they'd also been doing stuff with open badges and similar projects. A lot of them have been doing stuff with blockchain specifically. And so the idea was we were all kind of running into some of the same stumbling blocks and had some of the same goals. So we thought we could put our heads together and work together on this stuff, kind of push things forward a little bit. And specifically, we wanted to, the consortium is, as you can see, coming from a higher ed perspective. So we're not ignoring use cases outside of higher ed when it comes to digital credentials, but we are kind of starting with higher ed. We're focusing on higher ed. The things, some of the missing pieces that this group is trying to work on is pushing forward standards and protocols, but also like tools. And you'll see some of those in a moment. And we're trying to basically reduce the barrier to people using what we envision as the digital credentials to getting started with it. So let me back up just a little bit here, because now I'm going to start talking about verifiable credentials, which is a standard from, it's the standard that we're focusing on in the consortium. But verifiable credentials is coming out of the W3C. And there's a group there that's talking about verifiable credentials, but their definition of credential is much broader than what I've been talking about so far. So when we talk about verifiable credentials in that group, it can include driver's license, passports, fishing licenses, movie tickets, anything. I don't know if y'all saw that the Apple Wallet is going to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Georgia is actually one of the first states. Our driver's license are going to be.
Yeah.
Is Arizona one too?
Yeah, I think there were, what was it, 10 states, but we were one as well.
Arizona is one of.
Yeah. But I don't think that they're following. I'm not sure. I don't believe that's following the verifiable credential standard. But anyway, it's interesting that the idea of credentials and wallets is going to get even bigger in the next couple of years with some of that stuff happening.
Yeah.
But so obviously, when I talk about credentials, I'm focusing more on academic and learner credentials. But even within that, there's all the way from diploma down to like what probably, Melody, what you're thinking about when you're the stuff you're doing with badges, like skills level badges and credentials. So even within our use case of learner credentials, there's still a broad array of the types of credentials we're talking about. So I wanted to say that because as I go through this and I talk about some of the stuff that DCC is doing and some of the stuff that W3C is doing with the standards, they mean different things by credentials. Now this, I think, gives a slightly clearer idea of what DCC Digital Credentials Consortium is focusing on. So if I don't know if y'all heard this metaphor before, but when it comes to digital credentials, there's kind of two components, and you can kind of think of it like mailing something to someone. So there's the document and the envelope. And so when you mail something to someone, the document could be a letter or a drawing or a bill or an invitation, or, it could be anything. But the envelope is always pretty similar. It's the method by which you know that it hasn't been tampered with, and you know who it came from and who it was sent to, and there's a seal and there's a stamp, and and so if you think about digital credentials, we're focusing on the envelope and less on the document. So there's a lot of groups out there that y'all are probably when you talk about doing badges, I assume y'all probably working with open badges. The open badges standard from IMS Global, but there's vocabularies like CTDL and stuff like that that's happening out there, and they're more focused on the document. And we kind of felt like our best, we can maximize our impact by focusing more on the envelope and what it means for a higher ed institution to wrap up a credential and send it to someone and have it verifiable and secure and all that stuff. That's not to say that that's also not to say that we're ignoring all the work that's happening with standards bodies on the document. So we are really involved with, like we've been involved with, I don't know if y'all have heard about the work with Open Badges 3.0. We've been involved in that work too. And we've been involved with the T3 Innovation Network and, people like that. So we're not ignoring the document, but y'all interrupt me if you, I'm not pausing enough. So interrupt me if you have a question as I go along, but in that white paper that I mentioned a couple slides ago, we have, I'm
I
sorry.
have a question. So about the documents, you go back one.
Sure.
So you are saying you work on the envelope, or you don't verify what the document is about. Like if someone created a document, doesn't matter what, is it like legitimate, or is it like verified document or not? It's not like part of this work.
Well, we are sticking to verifiable credentials when you think about the document, but a verifiable credential, there's a lot of different sort of schemas that you could see there for different types of credentials. So in that sense, we're not saying necessarily, I don't know, like what fields should be included in or required or optional in a verifiable credential. We're trying to stay away from that a little bit, although we are like I said, we are involved with the, there's a task force, verifiable credential for education that we're really involved with.
Okay.
But
does the envelope contain the mechanism by which you validate the document? Or is that separate?
So the envelope is mainly to validate the person, the issuer, the person who sent it, validate the person who received it, but also that it hasn't been revoked, that it hasn't expired, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, I see. Good.
So yeah, when we were just looking at, well, I say this document envelope thing kind of happened before Georgia Tech joined the Digital Credentials Consortium, but they kind of realized, there's less work in the higher ed space on the envelope than the document. So let's see if we can't help out there. So that's where we've been spending a lot of time. So some of our guiding principles, I won't go through all of these, but some of them I just wanted to touch on because I find them interesting. So one is this first one, when it comes to learners retain primary control. So the idea of, you'll see a ecosystem diagram in a second, but like the learner is the person who holds the credentials and shares them with people, as opposed to a registrar's office or a product, a third-party product or a boot camp or, that kind of thing. It's that we want the learner to be the center of all this. So that's our goal. And then when it comes to issuers, I would just highlight this third one here, which is, some higher ed institutions don't have the resources to be able to start doing this kind of thing. So one thing we're really trying to work hard on is to provide libraries and tools and things like that lowers the entry to barrier for more institutions to start issuing verifiable credentials. And then the last thing I'd say is we have a group of principles around trust, and I'd point out this last one, which is that so when we were doing block certs, the way block certs works and the way it was set up is you were even though it was on the blockchain, you were still reliant on the issuer hosting something. They hosted their public key, they hosted the revocation list. And so if that coding boot camp that I mentioned earlier, that John Doe, if they issued him a block cert and then that boot camp went away and they weren't hosting that stuff, and you couldn't verify those credentials anymore. So we're really looking for a solution where credentials can be verified without the original issuer, either because they went out of business or they merged with, whatever. So that's some of the highlights of what we're trying to do, what our goals are. This is a diagram of the verifiable credentials ecosystem. So the green is really verifiable credentials writ large. So movie tickets, driver's license, diplomas, everything. And then in quotes here is kind of how it applies to our use case. And I'll walk through this real briefly, but again, you can see the holder or the learner is in the center. So rather than the issuer, so Georgia Tech being the holder and sending a transcript or a credential to a verifier or an employer, rather the issuer issues it to the holder, and the holder is the person who can send it to whoever they want. So the learner is in the center of all this, and the learner is in control. You can see here too, there's verifiable credential, but there's verifiable presentation, which is another, I guess that's a standard, but it's also coming out of W3C. The idea there is a presentation, can wrap or contain multiple credentials. So you go back to John Doe, they could send a credential from Georgia Tech, edX, and the coding boot camp in one presentation to an employer. So that's kind of what's happening there. But if you were, I don't know if anybody is in a registrar's office or works in the registrars, but you may be thinking, whoa. And that's kind of where this bottom part comes in, is the verifiable data registry. That's where we see things like a revocation list. So that's where maybe an issuer can maintain a list of credentials that are either expired or were issued by mistake or revoked or whatever. We're also maintaining a, at least for our initial pilots, an issuer registry. And that's where we're maintaining a list of identifiers for issuers that can be verified. So we're using, I'm throwing out all these buzzwords and terms. Just tell me if I'm going, there's too many of them, but there's another thing coming out of W3C called Decentralized Identifier documents, DIDs. And we're using a protocol, the DID web protocol. Basically, each issuer, Georgia Tech has a decentralized identifier that someone can verify that Georgia Tech actually is the person who issued this credential. And even in the future, one day, if for whatever reason Georgia Tech ceased to exist, those decentralized identifiers should still be verifiable. I'll say too that this down here in our mind is where blockchain may play a role. So we don't see putting credentials on the blockchain or personal information on the blockchain or anything like that. We see blockchain being where you might anchor a revocation list or issue a registry or things like that. So that's kind of the role right now where we see blockchain playing in this.
So Matt, then what kind of data store would hold the holder? Well, they'd have it in their digital wallet. Would it be the actual transcript, let's say in this case, or would it be a pointer to something?
So I think it would be the digital version of the actual. So
okay.
Yeah. So their wallet would hold the credential. It wouldn't be hosted by the issuer. That was another thing with block search. Really, the presentation of the credential was also hosted by the issuer. So yeah, all the storage is happening. And I should say too, since we're talking about the wallet, so right now, all the focus with a lot of, and I know that Greg, y'all are doing also a mobile, I assume it's a mobile wallet, the thing that y'all are working on. And I'll talk a little bit about the wallet that DCC is working on. But we also see, like, eventually there's also going to be web-based wallets, and they're not all going to be mobile things that live on your phone. So that's one thing we eventually want to build, some kind of reference implementation of a web-based wallet.
And you mentioned this verifiable data registry, and that registrars will whoa. So what did the Georgia Tech registrar say?
Well, they are familiar with what we're doing, and they you know, they say, whoa. But they like us trying this stuff out. I mean, you know, the last time I think this was shortly before COVID, is the last time I met with our registrar to give her an update on some of the things we're doing. And she was telling me how in the some group that she's in of registrars, everybody's talking about the comprehensive learner record. So they're talking about this stuff too. And they're not necessarily ready to move to digital credentials or verifiable credentials altogether. But I would say even more than registrar's offices, one of the roadblocks we've come across is, it's not a roadblock, but challenges is figuring out governance. So we had for example, we had a professor in our College of Business who wanted to issue micro credentials, digital credentials in his class throughout a semester. I'm sure y'all have encountered the same thing with the stuff y'all are doing, but there were some questions from different folks on campus like, well, this needs to go through some kind of oversight and governance to make sure we're not issuing Georgia Tech credentials willy-nilly. And so, and what does that look like? And you'll see in a moment, we've created a tool that would make it really easy for an instructor or faculty member to create a new credential and issue it in their class. But the process stuff, we definitely have to work that out too.
Okay.
So one question just to understand this. So the holder will have the actual digital credential, but the registry, like the verifiable, they will not have the actual data, like the actual digital, right?
I mean, it could. So yeah, that's right. I mean, I think probably all that we're doing with the Verifiable Data Registry right now is the issuer registry and the revocation list. But for example, they have I've written here schemas. So you could have schemas defined for different types of credentials. But no, I don't know actual credential or personal data would be part of the Verifiable Data Registry down there. It's more, I think, so like we want the learner to be in control and learner to be the center of this, but we also want the issuer to have some authority to continue to maintain some authority, you know, over the credentials. And so that's kind of the role that the data registry is playing.
Okay.
So sorry, one more question. So the issuer gives the holder the credential in some form, and this is in this envelope. It's contained within the envelope that you all have. And usually as a part of the DID, there's a claim that goes along with it that the verifier can use to verify that what they were given. Is that claim actually now down in the Verifiable Data Registry? In other words, the holder gives the verifier the envelope and then they validate it using the data registry, or are they just looking that it was issued by the right authority, or how is the claim validated that this is a valid credential?
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, this is where I wish I had some of the others doing some of this work here to make sure I say this right, but the claim is a part of the verifiable credential.
Okay.
So the claim is still hosted and stored by the holder as part of the credential.
Okay, so it would logically be a part of the envelope, I would think, maybe, or something. I don't know. Just
yeah, also every time everybody jokes about this envelope and document, every time we start talking about it, the line between the two gets blurrier and blurrier.
Okay. Okay.
All
right.
Matt, if I can ask a follow-up questions to that.
Hey, Didier. I didn't know you were here.
Sorry. I apologize, and I apologize for jumping late. But if I remember in all your discussions, I think there is also a registry of the issuers, especially around the envelopes. And so isn't verifications of the envelope and the claim has to get back to the issuer through a lookup in the registry.
That's where that sorry, I tried to pull up my participants panel and now everything in Zoom is weird. That's where
We still see you.
that's where the issuer registry comes into play. So
Yeah.
when the third party, the relying party or the verifier verifies a credential, one thing that they'll do is go back here and look at the decentralized identifier for the issuer and verify that it actually came from who it claims it came from.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so that's
Oh, yeah, okay. So you couldn't create a forged, you could create a fake issuer, and this, so somebody is doing this work as a part of the verifiable data registry that we actually gave this DID to Georgia Tech. That's the purpose of that.
And by the way, also for the holder as well. So we want to, there would be a DID for the learner as well, that we can verify that this person actually is who it was issued to. But yeah.
Is this verifiable data registry, is this something, it's a national organization, is it something that's conceived of, or are you, the 12 of you that are on this kind of starting to put that together?
Yeah, y'all are asking all the questions that we wrestle with and I was trying to gloss over because I don't have a great answer.
Don't worry, you don't have to.
No, I do. It's an interesting question. So the issuer registry idea that we're doing, the problem with that is it's a closed ecosystem then. Like unless you're in the registry, and you have, we have a decentralized identifier for you, then you can't necessarily be verified. So we're trying to sort that out. Like the first pilots we have are going to be more of a closed ecosystem than we would want. And there's the decentralized identifier, what do they call them? Protocols or methods? They are still being sort of invented. So we're using one called DidWeb, but that's sort of a placeholder for now. I don't think DidWeb is going to be DidWeb kind of creates a bit of a closed ecosystem where you have a list of people and their ID using DidWeb. So I didn't say that well, but we can't, there's like a tension between being a closed ecosystem and being trusted. And so that's still being sorted out.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I know that you're focusing on higher education, and I think that's really great because it helps you to really narrow your scope. So what I've always envisioned, and I've always thought working with the registrar, and Stanford might have tried to do this, and I don't know if this would do this kind of thing, but it's doing kind of like a 3D kind of transcript. So instead of just being, here's your certificate or whatever it is you earned, having the ability to look and see deeper into what you did to achieve that credential or degree. And I don't know if that's part of this system or if it's just, yes, here's what you earned and we're verifying it and you move on because now you have it in your wallet. So can you speak to it? Because as an employer, when I want to verify or validate what these people are telling me they do right now, I have a transcript that means nothing to me because it just has grades on it, but I don't really know what they learned. And I have a resume that they could have, who knows what's right on that. So I end up having to do my own testing on people to make sure they're telling me what they're telling me is valid. So I was wondering, in this system, are there actually going to be artifacts that you could look at to as a person and say, oh, this is verified and here's the artifact to prove that. So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think we think very similarly about this stuff. So like, I have two things. One is, I can't remember what the field is called, but there's a field in the Open Badges standard where you can link out to like proof of I can't remember what it's called, but you could link out to a paper you wrote or some code you wrote or a video you made, or
I
or
call it an artifact is what I
Yeah.
call it, is an
Yeah.
artifact, but you know.
now, and in the interest of to keep the learner at the center of this, the one possible challenge there is, so you could have something in the credential that says, here's a link to an artifact. But you don't want that to be hosted again by the issuer or by a third party that you're now reliant on. So one thing we've thought about, there's things, and Greg, I heard y'all mention this in the meeting earlier today, there's things like IPFS, which is a decentralized like file storage kind of thing. So we've talked at Georgia Tech about, can your credential also link out to these decentralized artifacts? Like you could store the proof of what you've done in IPFS or somewhere like that. And then your wallet becomes an e-portfolio.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's a big thing. The other thing I would say is there's also there's all this work happening everywhere around skills and the future of work. And we're involved in another project, an NSF project called SkillSync. And then, but there's the Open Skills Network. I don't know if y'all are familiar with what's happening there. But what do they call it? Rich skill descriptors. And it's basically a vocabulary, a standard for skills.
Okay.
And I feel like that will eventually this is all going to converge. So your credential is going to have, the basic credential stuff but who it came from, when it was issued, that kind of stuff. But I think it's also eventually going to have artifacts, and it's also going to have machine readable rich skill descriptors.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then verifiers potentially, if it's machine readable, they could build all sorts of applications to go out and, maybe that changes how they recruit or how they hire or find people or how you apply for, your credentials now have things at the atomic level that make sense to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all that stuff is where this is heading.
Are you wanting to standardize this so that this becomes the method that we do things? I don't know if you can even do a standard, but and I'm thinking from I guess a learner point of view, and then also from someone who hires the learner. How do I, what is the platform? How do I know that it's accurate? As the learner, is this really who I am? Doing that security and privacy. I mean, there's a lot of things that, kind of play into this, where that's going from a paper society where, I have in my Einstein office over here, I have my, diploma on the wall, and so that's my paper verification of that. But like Lisa had a thing with her husband, having to have the institution validate that he worked there or that he got his degree from there. So is this going to be like the virtual way that we do this? And will this become, I guess, the golden standard? Is that what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think so. I think until we sort of I agree that it's hard to come up to standardize. But until we standardize somewhat, you'll have too many silos, people will have 6 or 7 different wallets that don't interoperate. Credentials that you can't send from one to the other. So one thing I think I would say our strategy, so we see this verifiable credentials community out there, and they were working before, they weren't even thinking about learner credentials in a lot of ways. They were out there talking about vaccine passports and national IDs and stuff that's happening, globally. There's people involved with the Verifiable Credential group that we're in that's working on Europass stuff. So Verifiable Credentials is even outside of learning credentials, there's a lot happening. And so eventually the thought is that there will be more adoption, more familiarity, more comfort with this concept or this standard of verifiable credentials, what the credentials look like, how they're verified, what the wallets look like. And if so, we felt like we should be we should be following that train as well, basically. So I talked about the driver's license thing in Georgia. Eventually, well, I shouldn't say this with certainty, but hopefully they'll standardize. And if everybody's using verifiable credentials, the driver's license use case will switch to verifiable credentials as well. So I guess we're kind of making a bet.
What vaccine passport are they going to standardize on there in Georgia?
Oh, don't get me started.
Sorry.
So you're
Yeah.
looking at going to something like, I don't know if you guys can see, but that's my Apple Wallet that I have. Are you wanting to do it like inside something like this? So everybody
yeah.
has a wallet and then they can just go,
Yeah.
oh yeah, there's my academic credentials that are, you know,
Yep.
right next to my Starbucks card. Is that kind of what you're wanting to do?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what the future we imagine. Your driver's license, your Starbucks card, your tickets to, you know, the soccer match tonight, and your diploma could be in the same wallet. Now, you may choose to have them in separate wallets, but they could, you know, in the future, ideal future, they could all be in the same wallet one day.
Hey,
The
Matt,
thing about COVID, sorry.
I
COVID
was-
passport, they already started to.
Yeah, and they're using this technology.
And for
Right.
globally, like not in
Yeah, I think so.
some countries started to do that, I think.
Yeah,
think they're
and
using Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
what company was it? I guess it was
I saw
Microsoft.
IBM. I thought I saw IBM. Yeah, that had using their.
One countries use it. There's one of the people who's like, part of the countries that have that.
And just by the way, Matt, you know, when you were talking about wallets earlier, the one that we implemented here is a web-based wallet. It's not an
is it?
app-based. So, yeah,
Interesting.
so,
Okay.
yeah. So we can connect sometime next week or something. We can share with you what we've got.
Yeah.
But we're
that'd be
trying to
great.
make it, you know, using some open standards so that it's interoperable. So again, I think we talked about that earlier. It'd be kind of interesting to see if we could interoperate.
Yeah. That's cool.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, I just wanted to maybe bring up 2 points that you and I had long time ago discussions. And this is just for my own curiosity. Are you doing any further work or any communications with the folks from ISU? Because, you know, they were also developing their own wallet, right, that they demoed not long ago. And then the other question is there any work going on with the Solid project? Because a lot of the issues is managing the plethora of link data, right? I mean,
So on the Arizona State thing, we have regular discussions, but I don't know if anybody from Arizona State's here. But I just had a meeting with one of the folks that works in Ed Plus at Arizona State that's working on their stuff. And they, like you said, they have the Pocket Wallet, which they announced recently at one of their conferences. So they're doing a thing called the Trusted Learner Network. And I'll admit, I have read about it. I don't completely understand how it's different than Digital Credentials Consortium, but it may be very much the same in a lot of ways. But I know that they're also looking at a lot of the same stuff they're looking at verifiable credentials and DIDs and things like that. So even though there's like a separate effort, I don't feel like we're wildly diverging. And the same with the stuff that Greg and them are doing at University of Arizona with Flurry. Based on what I've heard, y'all are looking at a lot of the same stuff as well. Solid. And yeah, Didier, you and I have talked about Solid a little bit. What I'll say is I know that the people that are sort of leading some of the efforts in the pilots that I'll talk about previously worked on Solid. So we have like previous Solid developers, I don't know what you would call them, but people who worked on Solid that are working on the wallet in DCC, working on some of the core libraries and things like that. But that's not to say that we're actually incorporating Solid in any way into what we've done so far. I think there's interest in that, but for the others, Didier, maybe you could give a short 10-second version of what solid is? You can do it better than me, I know.
I don't know if I can. I mean, so solid is kind of, tied to Tim Berners-Lee approach to the semantic web, and really trying to tie everything into linked data, right? So solid stands for social linked data. And so it's not necessarily tied to blockchain. It's not tied to the ideas, but it's more like a higher level principle of everyone having its own pod of personal online data, and basically, providing application access to a portion of this pod, right? So it's all about maintaining sovereignty of the data, right? So we talk about self-sovereign identity, but it's also maintaining the sovereignty of the data. And so it's placing people in control of the data rather than having the data stored and managed by a cloud provider, right? And you actually have to grant access to applications. So there are a lot of overlapping concepts, except that the approach is not necessarily directly tied to blockchain. It's really more, for learning management systems, it's every student will have access to their own pod of data when they come to Georgia Tech, and then the LMS right into the pod. That's the best summary I can give right now.
Hey, Didier, how are we doing? What does the S stand for in solid? Sorry, I didn't.
So sorry, solid, SOLID. So it's social linked data.
Social. Okay, social linked data. This sounds similar to what those Hyperledger folks are doing at IMS. Is it related?
So I will say that the implementation of solid are really not tied to blockchain and to Hyperledger, but you really have to think about that. You could run in your own home using a Raspberry Pi and a storage drive, a solid server which has this pod of data for each of your family member. And now anytime you access an application, that application has to come and write to your pod of data. So it's really bringing this data back to individual user. I'll try to see if I can post something on the chat.
I think I saw a cool video related to Solid talking about how one use case is that all of your social profiles and data on all the different social networks could live in your own Solid. What do you call it? A pod? It could, and you control it, and all those different social networks could, get the data from the pod that you control. So that this could also play into what Melody was talking about the artifacts and the actual, results of some that might be where Solid comes into play.
And so, someone may come to an institution, as an institution holds a pod, and then they take the pod back when they leave, so they maintain all of their artifacts. And the pod could be stored into something like IPFS or Filecoin, right? I mean, the data themselves, but it's really the mechanism by which you now not only have your DIDs, but you also have the data tied to your own. I just posted another link. So there is a lot of overlap in the approach, I would say.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So let's say we got about 3 minutes left. I'll just talk real briefly about 2 pilots that are happening. I'll talk about 3. There's 3 on this slide, so I'll stick to it. On the left, this is a pilot that McMaster University is working on out of Canada. It's kind of interesting because they're like letters, they're PDF documents, and they're less what you think about learner records. These are like administrative letters that get sent out to students. I think they have something to do with like immigration status, if I'm not mistaken. But they're trying to reimagine these as verifiable credentials. So that's kind of a different use case and kind of interesting. So how would you issue those and make them verifiable? And I know less about that pilot, but it's interesting in the sense that it's a different kind of verifiable credential. On the right is a screenshot. So this is the wallet that MIT is working on. They got an award from U.S. Department of Ed to build a open source like reference implementation that uses this. I always mangle what it was called, Universal Wallet Interoperability Spec or something like that. That was in the W3C Credentials community group. So they are trying to do an implementation of it specifically for student wallets. It's not completed yet. It's still in development, but this fall they're going to be piloting it with, I think, 5 higher ed institutions, and we're going to be one of them. As you know, a first pass at how well the wallet works, that each of these colleges are going to issue a credential. We're going to do like a low stakes credential with a student organization at Georgia Tech, issue credentials, but they're going to claim it using this wallet. Another pilot. And so, by the way, that wallet is going to be an open source wallet. It's going to be out on GitHub. It's going to be on the app stores. Like, people can use it, or they can build upon it or modify it, or, so that's an example of how DCC is trying to build things and make them available out there that other people can use. The last thing, Georgia Tech is building, my team is working on a Lti tool, which is like a plugin for a learning management system. We use Canvas at Georgia Tech. And basically you can add this plugin to a course in Canvas and, set some settings and say, when a student does X, Y, and Z, we automatically issue them a verifiable credential. This screen that I have a screenshot of here shows a QR code. So once the student earns it, they arrive at this page, they can scan that QR code and it adds the credential to their wallet. We're going to use this wallet over here on the right for our pilot. So, and again, that's out on the Digital Credentials Consortium GitHub. This Lti tool is out there. So we're hoping that that's useful to other people to try it out as well.
Could you put a link to that one?
Yeah, let me fast forward all the way to the end real quick. I was almost at the end.
Sorry.
Where I've got some links here. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And this right here is our GitHub. That has the Lti tool, some of the core libraries and stuff like that the different groups are working on. I would say, real briefly, this is the link to the Verifiable Credentials for Education Task Force, and it's open to the public. And actually Mondays, and it meets every Monday. And Monday's meeting, they're going to demo the wallet, the open source wallet that MIT is working on. So that might be of interest. The charter's there too. That's interesting. And this is the white paper again, this long URL. But I can send, maybe Greg, I'll send you my slides, and so folks can have these links if they'd like them.
That'd be fantastic, and we'll post them on our seminar site if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you all so much. I know we're at time, but I'm happy to stick around for a minute if y'all have any more questions.
Look at the question. This is really good. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it, Matt, especially because I contacted you on such short notice, but you were really very gracious to be here. I'm going to have to drop for another call in a minute as well. So I just want to thank Matt again and look forward to hearing more interesting stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Thanks for connecting me.
Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
No, but thanks, Matt. Probably we should connect on other levels. Sounds like you and I do the same kind of work. So it was really nice meeting you, and it was interesting hearing about what you're doing. And yeah, it sounds like it's going to be this competition to figure out which one bubbles to the top. So it'll be kind of fun to watch.
Well, I'm hoping that everybody just bubbles together. So
I hope so too. That's the best way.
Yeah. But
Then
yeah,
we can all break.
Melody, I'd love to connect with you to hear more about what y'all are doing too. So yeah, we should definitely do that.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll just send you a quick email and we can connect on another level. So thanks so much. I have to drop too. So have a good one.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks again.